The security guard at First National Bank didn't even look up when Martin Foster walked through the door that Tuesday morning. Just another elderly man coming to deposit his Social Security check. Grey hair, slow walk, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening, nothing that would suggest that 47 years ago this man had been one of the most decorated Army Rangers in Vietnam. But at 10:17 a.m., when 3 armed men burst through those same doors and started screaming orders, when they fired shots into the ceiling and forced 19 people to the floor, when the youngest robber put a gun to a pregnant woman's head and threatened to kill her if anyone moved, something ancient and dormant woke up inside Martin Foster, and in the next 12 minutes, that harmless old man would do things that none of those robbers could have possibly anticipated. This is the true story of how a 67-year-old retiree, dismissed by everyone around him as too old to matter, became the only thing standing between 3 violent criminals and 19 innocent lives. A story about training that never leaves you, skills that don't fade with age, and the moment when a man who society had written off proved that experience and courage don't have expiration dates. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's paying attention to, the quiet one, the old one, the one who's been through hell before and knows exactly what to do when it comes back around. This is the story of the day Martin Foster stopped being invisible and became unforgettable. Before we go further, I need to ask you something. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now. Every week I bring true stories of ordinary older men who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. Hit that like button if you appreciate these stories that mainstream media ignores. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed someone surprise everyone with hidden skills. I love hearing from this community that values experience and quiet heroism. Stories like Martin's matter because we live in a culture obsessed with youth. We celebrate young heroes, young athletes, young entrepreneurs, but we forget that the men who've lived longer have something youth can never manufacture: experience under pressure, judgment refined by decades, and calm that only comes from surviving real danger before. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about one man stopping a robbery. It's about what happens when training becomes instinct, when muscle memory kicks in decades after you thought you'd left that life behind, and when the world is forced to remember that age is not weakness and retirement doesn't mean irrelevance. Martin Foster was 67 years old on the morning of August 14, 2018. He lived alone in a small house in suburban Ohio. His wife had passed 3 years earlier. His kids lived in other states. He spent his days doing what most retirees do: morning coffee, crossword puzzles, grocery shopping, occasionally meeting old friends for lunch. To anyone watching, he was just another forgotten old man, filling his remaining years with routine and silence. But Martin Foster had a past that nobody at that bank knew about, and in 12 minutes, that past would save 19 lives. Martin Foster was born in 1951 in a small town in Pennsylvania. His father was a steel worker. His mother cleaned houses. They didn't have much, but they raised Martin to believe in duty, honor, and serving something bigger than yourself. So when he turned 18 in 1969, right in the middle of the Vietnam War, Martin did what thousands of young men were desperately trying to avoid. He volunteered for the Army, not just the Army, the Rangers, one of the most elite combat units in the military. The training was brutal. Most guys quit in the first few weeks, but Martin didn't quit. He had something that drill sergeants recognized immediately: an unnatural calm under pressure. While other recruits panicked during simulations, Martin stayed focused. While others froze when things went wrong, Martin moved. And when the chaos of combat was at its worst, Martin was at his best. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, earned a Bronze Star for valor, a Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, and a reputation among his unit as the guy you wanted next to you when things went sideways. Martin saw things in those jungles that he would never fully talk about. Lost friends, made impossible decisions, learned what it felt like to be responsible for keeping people alive when everything around you was designed to kill them. When he came home in 1973, Martin tried to leave all of that behind. He got a job as a machinist at a factory, met a woman named Linda at a church social, got married, had 2 kids, bought a house with a small backyard. He became exactly what America wanted its veterans to become: quiet, productive, invisible. He didn't talk about Vietnam, didn't wear his medals, didn't tell war stories at barbecues. He just worked, raised his family, and tried to build a normal life on top of memories that would never be normal. 45 years passed. The factory closed. Martin retired. Linda got sick with cancer and died after a long fight that drained their savings and broke Martin's heart. The kids moved away for better jobs, and Martin found himself alone in that house, wondering if the best parts of his life were all behind him. He'd wake up at 5:30 every morning out of habit. The army had trained that into him, and it never left. He'd make coffee, read the paper, do the crossword, maybe watch some news. Then he'd find small errands to fill the day: the bank, the grocery store, the hardware store. Anything to have a reason to leave the house and feel like he still had a purpose. On the morning of August 14th, 2018, Martin woke up like any other day. Made his coffee. Noticed he needed to deposit his Social Security check. Put on a button-down shirt and khaki pants. Grabbed his reading glasses. Drove his old sedan to the First National Bank 3 miles from his house. He'd been going to that same bank for 20 years. Knew some of the tellers by name. They were always polite to him, in that slightly patronizing way people are polite to the elderly. They'd smile, speak a little louder than necessary, treat him like he was fragile. Martin didn't mind. He understood. To them, he was just another old man. They had no idea who he used to be, what he'd done, what he was still capable of. And that was fine with Martin. He'd spent decades trying to forget that version of himself anyway. He pulled into the parking lot at 10:12 a.m. The bank was moderately busy, a few people in line, some tellers helping customers, a young security guard near the door who looked bored and was probably thinking about lunch. Martin walked in, grabbed a deposit slip and got in line behind a pregnant woman and a businessman talking too loudly on his phone. Everything was normal. Routine, forgettable. Till 10:17 a.m., when 3 men wearing ski masks and carrying guns kicked open the door and changed everything. The first gunshot made everyone scream. One of the robbers had fired into the ceiling, sending chunks of acoustic tile raining down. "Everyone on the fucking floor! Now! Now!" The voice was young, panicked, aggressive. The second robber ran to the tellers and started slamming his gun on the counter, demanding they open the cash drawers. The third, the biggest of the 3, grabbed the pregnant woman and pressed a pistol to her head. "Nobody moves! Nobody fucking moves, or I blow her head off!" People dropped to the floor instantly. The businessman, the tellers, an elderly woman near the ATM. Everyone went down, except Martin. For just 2 seconds, Martin stood there. Not out of defiance, not out of courage, but because 47 years of instinct kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. And his instinct was telling him to assess the threat before reacting. 2 seconds. That's all it was. But it was enough for the biggest robber to notice. "You, old man, on the floor, are you fucking deaf?" The robber shoved Martin hard in the chest. Martin stumbled backward and went down on one knee, hands raised in surrender. Okay, I'm down. But in those 2 seconds, Martin had seen everything he needed to see. 3 suspects, all armed, 2 with semi-automatic pistols, 1 with a revolver. None of them trained. Their hands were shaking, their movements were erratic. They were scared, which made them more dangerous but also more predictable. The young security guard had frozen completely, hadn't even reached for his weapon. The bank's panic button was behind the teller counter, probably already pressed, which meant police were coming. Which meant these guys had maybe 5 to 7 minutes before this became a hostage situation or a bloodbath. Martin's mind, quiet and rusted from decades of disuse, suddenly roared to life, not with fear, with calculation, angles, distance, sightlines, vulnerabilities. It was like a language he'd forgotten he knew, flooding back in an instant. He stayed on the floor, kept his hands visible, made himself look weak and harmless, and waited. The robbers were screaming at the tellers to move faster, demanding they empty the vault. One of them fired another shot into the wall to emphasize the point. The pregnant woman was crying. The businessman was praying under his breath. And Martin was counting footsteps, tracking positions, waiting for the mistake he knew was coming, because scared criminals always make mistakes. And Martin had learned 50 years ago how to turn mistakes into opportunities. The robbery was falling apart. The tellers were moving too slowly. The vault required a time lock that wouldn't open for another 3 minutes. And the robbers, high on adrenaline and whatever drugs they'd taken to build courage, were starting to realize they'd walked into a trap of their own making. The panic button had been pressed, police were coming, and now they had 19 hostages and no exit plan. "We need to go! We need to fucking go!" the smallest robber was shouting. But the leader, the one holding the pregnant woman, wasn't listening. He was screaming at a teller, demanding she override the time lock, threatening to start shooting people if she didn't. The teller was sobbing, explaining through tears that she couldn't, that it was impossible, that no one could open it until the timer released. Martin watched all of this from his position on the floor. His face showed nothing. Just an old man, terrified, trying to survive. But inside, decades of combat training were running scenarios. The leader was distracted, focused on the teller. The second robber was stuffing cash from the drawers into a duffel bag, not watching the hostages. The third, the smallest one, was pacing near the door, looking out the windows, watching for police. Their formation had broken down. They weren't covering each other anymore. They were 3 individuals panicking independently instead of a coordinated team. That's when Martin saw his opening. The smallest robber walked past him to check the window again. For just a moment, his back was to the room, his attention completely outside. The gun was in his right hand, hanging loose at his side. He was maybe 6 feet from Martin. Young, maybe early 20s, skinny, probably never been in a real fight in his life. Martin didn't think. Thinking takes too long. He just moved. 50 years dissolved in an instant. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. He pushed himself up off the floor in one smooth motion, closed the distance in 2 steps, and grabbed the robber's gun hand from behind, twisting the wrist in a specific way that caused immediate pain and forced the fingers to release. The gun dropped. Martin caught it with his left hand before it hit the floor. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds and was completely silent. The robber turned, mouth opening to scream. Martin hit him once in the solar plexus with a precise strike that emptied his lungs and dropped him to his knees, unable to make a sound. Then Martin pressed the gun to the back of the man's head and finally spoke, his voice calm and cold and nothing like the frightened old man from moments before. "Don't move, don't speak, or I will end you." The robber froze, but the other 2 had heard something. The leader turned and saw Martin, saw his partner on his knees with a gun to his head, and for a moment his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. An old man with a gun? How? That moment of confusion cost him. Martin had already moved again, using the kneeling robber as a shield, positioning himself at an angle that made a clear shot difficult. "Let her go," Martin said, nodding toward the pregnant woman. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that came from somewhere deeper than bravery. It came from experience, from having been in worse situations and survived. "Let her go, and we can end this without anyone dying." The leader's hands were shaking. The gun was still pressed to the woman's head. "You shoot me, I shoot her." "I don't need to shoot you," Martin replied calmly. "In about 90 seconds, this building will be surrounded by police who will shoot all three of you. Your only chance of walking out of here alive is to let these people go and surrender. Right now." The room was frozen. 19 hostages holding their breath, 2 robbers trying to process a situation that had completely flipped, and one 67-year-old man who had transformed from invisible to the most dangerous person in the room. The second robber, the one with the duffel bag, was the first to crack. He dropped the bag and raised his hands. "I'm done. I'm fucking done. Don't shoot." The leader looked at him with betrayal and rage, but his resolve was crumbling. He could hear sirens now, getting closer, could see through the window that this was over. He pushed the pregnant woman away from him hard, and she stumbled into the arms of another hostage. Then he dropped his gun and raised his hands. "On the floor, all three of you, face down, hands behind your heads." Martin's voice had the tone of someone who'd given these orders 1,000 times before. The robbers complied, and Martin stood there holding the gun steady, covering all three of them until police burst through the door 40 seconds later. The aftermath was chaos. Police flooded the building, paramedics checked the hostages, news crews arrived, and everyone wanted to know the same thing: who was the old man who'd stopped 3 armed robbers? Martin gave a brief statement to police, answered their questions, then tried to quietly leave. But the pregnant woman found him in the parking lot. She was crying, and she hugged him so hard he thought his ribs might crack. "You saved my baby's life," she whispered. "You saved us." Martin didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and got in his car. But before he could drive away, a young police officer knocked on his window. "Sir, I just want to say, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. How did you know what to do?" Martin looked at the officer, saw himself 50 years ago in that young face, and finally said out loud what he'd spent decades trying to forget. "I was a ranger, long time ago. I guess some things don't fade." The officer nodded with respect and stepped back. Martin drove home, made himself dinner, watched the news, which was covering the story. They called him a hero, a good Samaritan, the guy who stopped the robbery. But they didn't understand. Martin hadn't felt heroic. He'd just done what needed to be done, same as he did in Vietnam, same as he'd been trained to do before most of these news anchors were even born. That night, Martin slept better than he had in years, not because of what he'd done, but because for the first time in a long time, he'd felt useful, he'd mattered, and maybe, just maybe, all those years of training and sacrifice hadn't been for nothing after all. The story of Martin Foster is a reminder that society gets it wrong when we assume age equals irrelevance, that quiet people are weak people, that retirees have nothing left to offer. Martin walked into that bank invisible, just another old man nobody noticed. But when it mattered, when lives were on the line, 50 years of experience became the difference between tragedy and survival. We live in a world that worships youth and forgets its elders. But men like Martin prove that experience, training, and calm under pressure are things you earn over a lifetime. They don't fade. They just wait, dormant, until the moment they're needed. And when that moment comes, age becomes irrelevant. Only skill and courage matter. If you know someone older who society has written off, remember Martin. Because the person everyone ignores might be the person everyone needs. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to matter. Thanks for watching.